Synchronizing.
What is going on YouTube? What is going on YouTube world? So today's tutorial is actually coming as a suggestion from one of our followers and subscribers, literally a Kiwi Ramirez. Alright bro, I got you here. He's not a yes man.
No woman wants a yes man.
He does bad things, but we already know that. Anyway, side note. We got Ollie today.
Speak for yourself, moron. Oh my god, that is funny!
All the assets are below. We're gonna go ahead and hop in. Today's tutorial is a bit beefy. So there's a lot of tips, a lot of tricks in there. I'm gonna go ahead and leave this timestamps below because some of you guys might not wanna, follow the entire thing. But anyways, outside of that, let's go ahead and get ripping. Knock it out.
Sorry guys, I'm a little sick, so I apologize about that. Alrighty guys, so we are fired up in After Effects. I'm going to start in a different composition where I created some of these pre-packaged components. There's an effect where he kind of reveals and there's this really crazy turbulence that flows out. So I wanted to go back and recreate that for you. So just in case you guys wanted to see how I did that, all it was a couple of shape layers stacked on with different alpha channels. One was at like 25. One was at like, let's see here. Yeah, so one was at 30, 50, 75, 100. And then they scaled in at different times and different offsets and random seeds. The effects on each layer, just to show you guys really quick, are going to be a turbulent displace and a roughen edges. So I have both of those evolving over different offsets as well, and I randomized the seeds on those. And then you'll notice that the turbulent displace amount is set to 493. I set it to twist, and then the size is at 50. So just a good recreation. If you guys want to recreate that effect, go for it, because we're going to be using this as our alpha reveal for one of those areas. All right, so this 1080 clip, we're going to go ahead and throw it to the canvas, create a new composition, and we are going to go ahead and do our mocha track. Now guys, I'm not going to go over this. We've done enough of this in all of our tutorials, so as soon as this track is done, we're going to create a null object and set it to that track. So if you want to, let's go ahead and create the null now, and we're going to call this watch track. We're going to go into our 1080 clip, make sure our resolution is set to full, and throw mocha on that beast and start our track. First thing that we want to make sure that we do here now though is to make sure that we set our export option to transform. We don't need any of the quarter pin data. Select our watch track and hit apply export. Go over to, once that happens, go over to your layer. We really don't need the rotation or the scaling. All right, cool. So we have our watch tracked and we are good to go there. So that is step one. So now that we are back, we're going to go ahead and we're gonna add our smoke out of the watch kind of deal to the layer. So I have this stock footage. You guys can get smoke assets from just about anywhere. I can't give you these. I got these from Production Crate, so just bear that in mind wherever you go to get your smoke assets. Basically, you're just gonna need something that kind of pushes out of the phone, looks semi-realistic, and that we can mask a little bit. So anyways, once you get your smoke asset onto the layer, go ahead and we're going to parent it to our watch track once we get it in place so that, we have something that looks, right or whatnot. This looks good to me. So again, right about here is where we're gonna want that smoke to start. So I'm gonna go ahead and set my, maybe just bring it out right about here kind of deal. All right, so cool. We got some smoke on our canvas here. We've got it coming out of our watch a little bit. Nothing crazy, kind of looks cool. Nothing wild, so cool. Step two, get the smoke on the canvas, done. Okay guys, so let's go ahead and hop into step three. We're going to create a new solid, call this solid watch light. All we are going to be doing right here is creating a nice little mask, something like that, and we are going to feather the mask, And this is where you just play around a little bit so you got what you're looking for. You can also do this with a flare, an optical flare. If you guys have optical flares by Video Copilot, that's just much easier. Select your watch layer, go up to your pan behind anchor point tool, hold control, double click, it'll put your anchor point in the center of the object. Go to your watch light, and again, all right, cool, that looks good. And we are going to set a couple of scale animations. We're gonna take this guy down to 0. Okay, cool, so watch light is set. We're gonna go up to our layer, we're gonna hit select fill on our layer and select something that's a little bit more blue or whatnot. Okay, cool. And then we are going to set this guy to overlay, and let's fix our fill color to something like it. And again, guys, this doesn't have to be perfect, because what you're going to ultimately do is you're going to place a glow on this. So right here, yeah, it looks good. Doesn't have to be perfect, right? Got a nice little light, and we've set it to overlay. So we have our first one. All right, so cool. All right, guys, so I jumped a little bit ahead, unfortunately, and just went ahead and did the glow. Just to backtrack really quick and go back, what I did is on that, right underneath the fill layer, I added the first glow, and then I just set the threshold to somewhere around like 20. And then glow radius at about 87, and then glow intensity at about 0.6. And this was on the watch light layer, and then I set, okay, so you can kind of see that it grow in. I moved the position scale to kind of be right on the accent, like right as the hand is going down, so it looks kind of like that. It's growing in right when it gets to the very bottom of that, right? Okay, and then second thing, I added a glow 2, and I added the threshold at about 17. Radius is 230-ish. Glow intensity at 0.6 again. So and then I set that. Okay, and then so you can kind of see it's really intense. It glows, and that radius is really big on that second one. So you have something that looks like that. Okay, so cool. So we have our first glow on our watch light. And what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to duplicate that layer, and we're going to set the second blending mode to soft light. We're going to open up our scale, and we're going to set the scale to somewhere like, a lot bigger, right? Let's get something a little bit more intense. And then what we're going to do on both these layers is go ahead and set the opacity down to 30% on both. So when we play that back, you can kind of see it's accented, but it's not overwhelming, right? And you can play with those blending modes a little bit, fine tune it to get exactly what you're looking for. But basically that's what I did on the first run through to get that glow, that initial glow effect. So cool, we have all of the watch light done. So let's go ahead and work on our Shockwave. Don't be afraid to play with that intensity, because ultimately what's gonna happen is this guy's gonna blow up. And then I might duplicate him, set him to soft light, something again. And then I might even go in here and set a radial blur on this first one. So you have something, I don't know, let's try like 44, 40 something. All right, so you can kind of see here, if I'm just to quarter it a little bit more, that it really helps to kind of bring that into light a little bit more. And again, you might just have to continue to fine tune this until you get rid of a lot of that grit in the background. Let me see here. So we're gonna start with this one. So it's okay to kind of really blow it out right here, because at this point, the goal is to kind of use that as a transition. Now that's absolutely ridiculous. Something right about there looks pretty good, and we can work with that. So let's go ahead and copy our radial blur, and let's paste it over into our other area. So it just kind of looks like it's really exploding out of that area. And again, one of the things that we'll probably want to do is offset that and then set the scale to something, you know, a bit more intense, so that when it blows up, it's like really taking over the entire screen. So let's let that render for a minute. Let's see what we got. So one of the things that we can do too with our Shockwave, instead of waiting for all of this stuff to clear, is to go ahead and set some opacity, you know, effects on this, because right about here, we can go ahead and start letting this stuff disappear. We don't want this to linger on, you know, for as long as the Shockwave does. So you set some opacity and bleed this guy off here, and then do the same thing up here. So let's go ahead and add an adjustment layer. Let's call this exposure, or, you know, you can call it exposure light. And then what's gonna happen, we're gonna go ahead and throw an exposure layer on this at the very top. So right when it hits that max lighting, right here, I think that we want to go ahead and set our exposure up to something like really extreme. So let's go ahead and set a keyframe at like 1. And then again, I'm gonna go back here and look at all of my other keyframes for these layers by selecting and pressing U. And then I'm gonna go right about here, and I'm going to maybe back here a little bit. Right here on my exposure, I'm gonna set it to 0. And then so basically as everything starts moving into play, we have this, you know, exposure adjustment layer kind of moving our entire background scene up in lighting as well. And then what we're going to want to do is to bring that exposure level back down somewhere right about here. So you can even set this guy back to 1 so that it holds a little bit longer. So cool. So you have that little flash of light in the background as well. Really helps to sell the effect. So okay, cool. Now that we have all of our shockwaves, our exposure, everything's good to go, we are ready to go ahead and either A, you would create your alpha reveal, which if you remember from the beginning of the video, we already kind of walked through that process of how I created that. So typically you would just use that as your alpha channel. But in this case, if you want to use the pre-packaged asset, which is ultimately the same thing, that's fine. You can just drag this movie file or this .mov file to the canvas. You can go ahead and align it with your the ending of your first clip or where that screen runs out. But since you have to use it this way, we have to target it using the Luma inverted matte, because we're going to have to target the luminance channels to be our matte. So in that case, once you get that lined up and you select Luma inverted matte, you're going to notice, boom, right off the bat, wow, it goes ahead and it peels everything back and creates a really cool matte. Go ahead and you would grab your secondary clip, you would throw that underneath. For the sake of this, let's see how it reveals. And then, okay, we have this reveal underneath. We'll rename that second clip. I will scale it down to something like there. All right, cool. So we have this second clip being revealed, right, which is really cool because the first one's basically being peeled away. Now what we can do inside that clip is we can set up that second clip as a pre-comp and go ahead and add our effects into there. So for this, I'm going to go ahead and leave the scale alone, but I'm going to go ahead and pre-compose that second clip. Let's go ahead and call it second clip, move all attributes in a new composition, and now we are ready to kind of finalize that transition. Basically something that looks like this. Now, if yours is a little slow, what you could always do on that alpha reveal area is you can right click and go into time, select enable time remapping. And then if you'll click U on your alpha matte layer, oh gosh, and I jacked it up. So hit enable time remapping. You'll be able to go scroll and bring in that frame a little bit more, and it'll speed up how quickly that bleed starts. I want mine to be relatively quick because I want it to really kind of feel like it just popped into play, right? So it's like boom, and then everything's there. Now you'll notice the one thing that we still need to handle is probably fading out our watch light. Now we can handle that in a minute. So for the sake of just knocking this out, let's go ahead and hop into our second clip. And in our second clip, on the effects, go ahead and add a CC toner, and you can adjust, you know, the colors to fit your scene. I did that like that bluish tone that you saw in Amir's video. And again, this isn't perfect, this isn't flawless. I would probably fine tune this a lot more because this looks nothing like it. Anyways, do what you want to do. And then what you could do is go ahead and drop in that smoke asset, which is drop that directly onto your scene and go ahead and select an add blend mode. Let's move that offset because it kind of want the smoke to just already be on screen. And then let's duplicate that layer and then move the smoke as an additional offset. And let's do it one more time. And let's move it at a different offset, and then maybe let's scale this bad boy up, and then that second one, let's scale him up a little bit as well. So you kind of have a little bit of this repeating, you know, dreamy effect, right? Okay, so that's cool. We got some smoke, and then if we went back to our clip and we kind of look at what it's doing, we have that really cool kind of dreamy effect when it opens up into that second clip. Okay, so it looks really cool, but the one thing that I would probably want to do is go back to the second clip, and actually instead of doing it directly on the clip, let's go ahead and create an adjustment layer, and let's call this lens optics, and then let's go ahead and hit lens, or just type in optics, and then we're going to have an optics compensation on this entire thing. We're going to reverse the lens distortion and then bring this up a bit to where it kind of looks like that. We don't want to do it on the actual smoke. We just want to do it on the actual clip. So just dump it in right above the clip. So anyways, if you go back and you look at it again, you kind of see it, maybe you don't. Regardless, kind of gives it a little bit more of that effect. So far everything's been pretty straightforward, right? Nothing outrageous, nothing crazy. So we're gonna create a new solid, and we're gonna call this particles. And then we're going to go ahead and move this up, and we're going to go ahead and pre-compose this layer, and we're going to call this particles. If I can spell it. Okay, cool. Awesome. So what you're going to do is you're going to go into this layer, and then you can actually delete that solid because we need a new solid. It needs to be a white solid actually, and this can be called particles. All right, cool. And then yeah, about the length of, you know, our composition or whatnot. Okay, cool. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna go search for an effect called particle world, and then what we are going to do is we're gonna go into the grid and guides, and we are going to literally turn off the grid. We're gonna go into the producer, physics, and open up the particle area. For the animation type, we are literally just gonna type in like viscous. For the time being, we're gonna turn the gravity off, and we're gonna turn the velocity off. We are then gonna go into particle type, and we're gonna type in faded sphere. And then we are going to go ahead and check off a few other things. We're gonna select custom, and then an opacity map. We're gonna go ahead and fill in the rest of the opacity map. You can kind of color all over it. Just bring everything to the top. And then in your custom color, I think you can select it to origin constant. And then what we're going to do is we're basically going to, you're gonna notice that basically now these particles are coming onto the screen and they are just building. And what we want it to do is we basically want that the particles to come onto the screen, and then we want to be able to control and go in through those particles in Z space. So basically what we're gonna do is we're gonna bring the radius X up, the radius Y up, and the radius Z up, and we are going to bring up some particles up here. You know, something crazy like that works just fine. Let's go ahead and set birth size to, you know, I don't know, like 2.5, and death size to 2. Actually, let's take that down a lot more. I'm thinking of, you know, we want them to kind of look like stars almost, so really tiny. Size variation is fine, just leave it alone. And you can up, if you want more on the canvas, you can bring them up. Longevity, I think I set it to 20, and you really don't need that actually, because I'm gonna show you why. The birth rate is gonna get really hard and really intense really fast. So basically what we're gonna want it to do is we're gonna wanna set it, come out here a couple frames and then just set it to 153 or 100, and let's just set it at 100. And then we're gonna go back and we're gonna set it to 0, and then we're gonna hit U so we can see those keyframes. We're gonna zoom in, and then once it hits 153, a couple frames out, we're gonna wanna hit 0 again. So basically it just comes on to screen and then goes off. Now what we're gonna wanna do is we're gonna wanna hide all of those keyframes and slide over our, slide it over to where our birth rate is stopped at 0. So now we have all these particles on the screen. Now we're gonna wanna select our radius. If you notice on your radius Z, you're gonna wanna go ahead and move those particles heavy into Z space, because we're gonna use a camera to really, to dig in here and move through those. So now that we have our particles on the canvas, we're gonna go ahead and select new camera, 24mm is just fine. And then we're gonna select new null object, and we're gonna set this to cam control. And then we're going to select our camera, and we're gonna parent it to our cam control layer. Now here's the crazy cool part, is if you notice now, your null is literally parented to your camera. So if I move the null, my camera moves with it. But I want to make sure that that is a 3D object too, because I want to move the position in Z space. So we're gonna start the position somewhere back to where those particles are, or kind of begin, you know, maybe something crazy like, you know, negative 12,000, and then we'll scroll to the very end of our timeline, something right around, you know, 10, and we'll just hit positive 12,000. So it basically moves through that entire frame, and it'll show us how quickly those particles are moving. If that's not fast enough, we can always slide these forward and move that faster, create more of a dramatized effect. But we want it to stop at, I think it was 8 seconds was our composition size. So something like that works just fine. We're gonna go ahead and want to set our motion blur up. And actually, we're not going to want to set that up. We're going to set our motion blur on our particles. So our particles are actually motion. You get that kind of time warp effect going on. So cool, looks really cool. You got all this kind of stuff going on. And if you're not happy with the birth rate, which I'm kind of not, I can always go in here now, and I can go to my second keyframe, and I can select 150. So I can get more particles on the canvas, and then bring that back. Now here's the one thing, the tricky thing is if you hit full resolution, you'll see actually how many particles are on there, and then half will kind of show you less and less and less. So it's really good to make sure that you keep that in mind. All right, cool. So we have this particle system, everything's set up, everything kind of looks pretty good, and now we're pretty much ready to roll. So if you go back into this layer, what we're gonna be doing is using that as kind of like a, God, what do you call it? A displacement map to kind of offset some of those things. Because in Amir's video, you could see those particles kind of moving, and there was some slight displacement happening on those elements. So one of the things that you could do is on your actual element, we know that we don't want any of those particles coming from the middle, so you can create a simple mask right here and subtract that mask, and then go ahead and feather it. Something like 200, you know, I don't know, maybe even less, like something like 80 pixels, so they're just not bleeding out from the center. Now we can just set a nice little glow on these first. All right, so we have a cool little glow going on. It doesn't have to be anything crazy, but we do want it to be substantial enough to where it really feels like you've got that kind of dreamy effect going on. And just to kind of bring it down to where it's a little bit more subtle. Now this is really where you can control it, guys, is to make sure that it's your own. I brought mine down to something like 20. I didn't want it too overbearing. You know, something like that was fine, but even that's a little bit extreme. I would probably fix some masking on that a little bit more. And then what you can do is take that particle system and go back to your main clip, and you can throw that particle system on the canvas like that, and then go ahead and hide this layer, create a new, and then go to your second clip. And what we're gonna do now on that second clip, and you can literally do this on an adjustment layer, but for the sake of just keeping this fast and quick, I'm gonna go ahead and set this up. So create a displacement map, add it to that clip, select the particle layers, select the luminance channels on both of those values, and then just offset it slightly. Wrap pixels around, and you'll notice you've got this little bit of a, you know, kind of displacement map thing going on around those areas. So you can keep fine tuning this as needed. I added some overlays and some exposures and even some lens flares into my second clip. Those are all things that you guys can do. If you add the lens flares and just mask those things out, those bad boys look really cool added in there and kind of help sell the effect, something like that, you know. And then I just masked them to be into the, you know, into the areas where the smoke was. I added an exposure level, added some wiggle to it, and you pretty much had some had the same exact effect. Now on the watch light areas, the one thing that we didn't do, if you go ahead and open those up, is we want to make sure that as soon as it opens up that we're fading those back out and scaling those back down to 0. And then we should have something that looks like that. Boom. And then we can make sure to set the motion blur on all of our layers, except our alpha matte layer. I don't really want that. And then any of our bottom layers, I think the motion blur's fine on those, but everything else is, you know, can have it and looks pretty cool that way. Okay, so I wanted to hop back in here really quick and show you guys a few more things if you're still around that kind of really help to add to the effect. One of those was I scatterized the hand layer where the hand was coming in, and I kind of scatterized those elements. And then the only other thing I wanted to show you guys was to create that like a little bit more of that dreamy effect, was to add a lens adjustment blur. And what I did was, you can go in and look up an effect called channel blur, and you can offset some of the red, and it gives you that chromatic aberration look and some of the blues a little bit, and it kind of gives you that dreamy, you know, chromatic aberration kind of thing going on. You could do something like that, and then you could combine it with like a compound blur and just pull the compound blur back just a little, just a touch, just enough to where it kind of does enough. And then what you could do is just set a mask on that entire layer to really, you know, and then kind of just bring that mask to the center and then feather that sucker out, you know, something like, I don't know, 300. So it just kind of affects the edges or whatever. That's a good little additional tip for selling that dreamy like state, right, or effect. You can play with those combinations and come up with your own really cool little technique. Other thing that was the most important thing that I felt like I left out was, go ahead back into your scene, and the first thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to want to take this first clip where our hand comes in. We're going to want to duplicate that. We're going to call this hand dissolve. All right, now cool. Right around where our lights start to flash in, let's go ahead. We can delete our mocha layer right there, because we're just going to do a rough mask around our hands. It can be really dirty. That's the beauty of this effect. You don't have to be precise in your roto on this. Okay, cool. And we've got our hand dissolve, or our hand mask right here. Now, right here, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to go in and look for an effect called Scatterize, CC Scatterize, and go ahead and set a keyframe right there. Right about here, we can go ahead and dissolve it, and we'll push him to about 20. And then right about here, we will, and we can just leave it alone. That looks good. And what we need to do now is handle our opacity. So go ahead and hit U to see where that scatterize effect starts taking place. So right about here, I think I'm gonna hold that a little bit longer because I want it to kind of stay into the effect right about there. So go ahead and set an opacity keyframe right here. Select U again so you can see everything on that layer, and then right here we're gonna fade him out. So when you play it back, you get something that looks like that, and it kind of just has a little bit. It's like, you know, the hands are being warped away. Amir does that in his video. It's something to that effect. You would have to play with it to get it exactly right. And then another trick that I did is I duplicated that layer, and I went into that. And on the ending scatterize, I held these, brought these out a little bit more, and then I messed with the mask. So you take your mask path and you literally just bring this guy in a little bit doesn't have to be anything perfect, because on this layer, you can feather it out a bit more and really hide some of the grit. So I know that looks ridiculous, but if you go ahead and select feather, and we feather this out at maybe like 100, and then what you can do is on that additional hand dissolve layer, let's put him right on top of the other one, you could set him to screen, and it kind of leaves a little bit more of that whitish tone look, right? And so you kind of have something that looks like that. And again, what I would probably do is I would move some of those around so the scatter doesn't start at the same exact time as the other one. You'll see, and that's because the opacity is all jacked up. It starts at 100%. So what you're going to want to do is set this to 0, and then it grows in, and then it kind of dissolves right there. So again, you could play with how long that stays on the canvas, like as that comes in, but it just needs to be a flash and then fades away. You could add some blur on that. You could really kind of fine tune it to make it yours. But that was another really cool technique that I wanted to make sure that you guys knew. So there you go. So yeah, that pretty much covers it, guys. And again, I would blend those lens flares in, add an exposure, set those to like some kind of overlay or soft light layer, maybe add a glow, and then filter those out, and you could continue to fine tune this a little bit more. And yeah, just go frame by frame and watch his video, but that's pretty much the same effect. And yeah, so there you go.
Alrighty guys, so that's it. The Amir Zakeri rewind watch transition thing. So, and as always, Patreon accounts below if you want to contribute. It'll really help me out and give me some more time to dedicate to doing this. Probably going to take a little bit of a breather for the next few weeks with the holidays and, you know, the kid's birthday coming up. So anyways, that being said, guys, take care.